the whole creation, the spiritual sun that is the basis and foundation for the whole creation. The Christ being had been descending through the dimensional realities of creation, through vast periods of time, until it actually entered the sun, our sun. And the first person, human being, who actually saw this was Zoroaster. And this was in the second post-Atlantean epoch, that Persian post-Atlantean epoch. And the name Ahura Mazda means that one in the aura of the sun. And it was Ahura Mazda that Zoroaster saw. And it was, he actually saw the process of the Christ being entering into our physical sun from those higher dimensional realities. Well, some of you who've been in some other classes will know the answer to this. But does anyone have any idea who Zoroaster was in a later incarnation? Jesus. Jesus. So we're looking at a previous incarnation of Jesus who ends up being the host for the Christ 2,000 years ago, was Zoroaster in a previous lifetime, the individual who established Zoroastrianism. And we're going to find that the connection between this Master Jesus, because he's an ascended master now, and the relationship with the Christ being goes way, way, way back. And it had to do with them working together in all kinds of ways and realities through vast periods of time, because that was Jesus' last incarnation as Jesus, and he is an ascended master. He never reincarnates again. So here we see that was, pretty magnificent last lifetime because we're talking about stuff that's way beyond avatars to the degree that people are familiar with that teaching from the Vedic tradition when we talk about the Christ being entering into Jesus and the creation of this very unique being called Jesus the Christ. So Michael retired to the sun, and the Christ being then shortly after that descended into Jesus' body. The Christ being was residing in the sun, temporarily preparing to descend to earth and enter into human evolution. And that's why, anthropologists and stuff, all these ancient cultures, they worship the sun. They think they're sun worshipers, and they think it's some silly thing about, it's the source of light and heat and all of this. And that's true, of course. Where would we be without the sun? But they were seeing inside the sun. They were seeing into the spiritual sun. And they were seeing the spirit of the sun, which was the Christ. Because the Christ was in our sun for thousands of years before he actually came into humanity. And they knew, all the ancient traditions knew the Christ being was coming. Not just the Hebrews. You're going to find if you go into all of these various spiritual traditions, they were all aware. They didn't know exactly when, and they didn't know exactly in what manner, but this being, the Christ, was going to enter into the earth in human evolution. So when Michael was done with his regency, he retired to the sun. And he witnessed the departure of the Christ from the sun to enter into human evolution and incarnate into Jesus. And one of the results of the Christ event was that we had now come evolutionarily to the point in time, humanity had, to where we had to be given the freedom of thought. And it was that he, as Michael, as the regent, the one in charge cosmically of the universal principle of creative intelligence, he had to release that creative intelligence from the sun and allow it to descend to the earth and enter into human souls. This is huge because it meant that each one of us then had the entire universal principle of creative intelligence, or the mind of God, within each and every one of us. And the cosmic consciousness to unfold, to really be able to claim and fulfill our true destiny, because we'll get into that more in future classes. But there were huge risks in terms of Michael releasing the cosmic intelligence from the sun and allowing it to descend to the earth and enter into humanity and human souls. Because the being of darkness, Ahriman, the individual that, the being, I should say, not individual, the being that also Zoroaster saw, he saw Ahura Mazda as the being of light, and he was the first individual who actually saw his counterpart, the being of darkness, Ahriman, or what we would, in Christian terminology, know as the Antichrist. And it goes into deep stuff. I'm not going to go into that much, but the home of this being cosmically is the earth. This being of darkness's home is in the inner dimensional realities of the planet Earth. And it is the being of death. It is the being of materialism. It is the being of darkness and evil as we know it. And not just in terms of humanity. And these are cosmic realities. These are not philosophical points or abstractions. We're talking about cosmic beings, and it's about understanding the whole cosmic drama that relates to life in the cosmos. And it is a drama of light and darkness. What happens as the sun rises? Shadows. This is the being of shadows. When you see the light rising, you're also going to see the shadows grow. And of all of the places in creation that are the basis of this darkness, it is this earth. And that is the reason to also understand that one of, not the only, but one of the primary things about humanity, which makes it totally unique to any other life wave of being in this whole creation, is that we were actually created, and it is our destiny, and we are the agency of the divine, to actually enter into the realm of darkness, take the darkness into ourselves, and transmute it into light. The earth and what's going on here with humanity is intense and heavy, and this stuff is real. And that's where we get choice, because if everything is light and everything is good, what kind of choice is there? If you don't have choice, you don't have freedom. And this is the ultimate choice, because there's varying degrees of freedom within the cosmos, but not to where the ultimate light, which is the Christ being, which is here on earth, and the ultimate being of darkness is here on earth. And they're both, we can say, in their appropriate manners, because the light respects the individuality and freedom of the human being, but the darkness doesn't. The darkness doesn't play by the rules. That the human being has to choose between these forces that are right here. This cosmic battleground, this cosmic meeting ground of the most fundamental forces is right here. And it is that through this process, we basically transmute. It gets into deep understandings of the transformation of consciousness. Alchemy and the growth of consciousness and the transformations of consciousness are inherent within the very human being in a way as no other beings in creation. And it's unbounded and unlimited, yet it's the most challenging dynamic and situation that there is in all of creation. And so the choices that we make individually and collectively have huge consequences. All the beings and all the worlds are actually watching. You know, when you talk, this is stuff I don't get into, but you hear all this stuff on the periphery about ETs and, you know, people from the Pleiades, and all of this is serious and all this. The entire cosmos is watching what's going on here. And the ones that don't play by the rules get involved. This stuff I don't really get into. We've got enough on our plate without having to worry about that stuff. But basically, this is the main show that's going on. And the whole destiny of this universe and the divine plan hangs in the balance. And so when Michael released the cosmic intelligence into humanity, and he wasn't going to be able to give it support and direction and guidance within human evolution for another 2,160 years. He had to allow mankind to take this in with the forces of darkness and all their influence and not be able to do anything about it until his next regency, which is now. And what has happened is that this being, Ahriman, has basically taken the creative intelligence and distorted it into a totally soulless materialism. So that when we look at the culture and civilization, one of the main representations of this materialistic application of the creative intelligence is what we know of as our science. This science refuses to acknowledge a reality beyond the physical and the material. If you can't weigh it and measure it, it isn't real, it doesn't exist. They have negated the reality of the soul and the spirit. They have negated the foundation of all of life. The material is the form aspect in which soul and spirit incarnates, and I don't care if it's a galaxy or a tree or a human being. That's the form aspect. It's not the ultimate reality. Anybody who thinks that the physical reality is the ultimate reality has basically subscribed to this materialistic viewpoint, which is the Ahrimanic. And that's where atheism comes in and all kinds of other things. And we are going to find that when we have developed, if we looked in parallel to the time of Alexander in Greek culture and civilization, we're going to see that we have developed a world culture, a global culture, a common currency, a common language, developed knowledge to incredible degrees, exploration, all of these things. But it's got this whole bias of materialism. And therefore it distorts it. So what started happening, okay. So this is the situation. Michael has to wait till his next regency. And then he has to try to reclaim the cosmic intelligence for the light. And that's what he's doing now. And that's when you see all this alternative stuff coming up. Alternative science, alternative healing, everything alternative. I mean, the stuff that really is, it doesn't hold power because the institutions and all of that are still established very much in the Ahrimanic powers. But we're seeing this reaction and this uplifting and this rising light, because that's very much what Michael is about. This rising light of consciousness, this rising light of awareness that, wait a minute, this materialistic viewpoint on life is very limited. It's very incomplete. It really isn't speaking truth. It doesn't really represent me or the world in a way that really is satisfying or fulfilling or meaningful. There's got to be more. And that's, we'll get into this. This is very much what's going on and what has been going on. But a couple of important points. One, when Michael retreated to the sun after his last regency, he knew that human evolution was critically hanging in the balance because of this Ahrimanic direction of the cosmic intelligence. And he knew that his next regency was going to be a tough one, to try to reclaim the cosmic intelligence and really transform human culture and individual human thinking and consciousness. And so what Michael did was he established a school in the sun. This had never happened before. Never happened before. And what we're talking about this school in the sun is that when people died and went into the spiritual worlds and they would go through their cleansing and purification and ascension and do what they needed to do, for those souls who were deeply connected to the light and deeply connected to the Christ and deeply connected to Michael, they gathered in the sun and in the school of Michael. And for hundreds of years, Michael taught and trained human souls, preparing them to incarnate when his next regency would be, which of course is now. And so when we talk about this school of Michael, we're talking about something that is extremely esoteric, but extremely powerful and extremely relevant today. And those people, those human beings that were, those souls that were with Michael in the school of Michael in the sun are here now. And I'm sure you are some of them, or you wouldn't be attracted to this. And part of this is to remind you and awaken you to your responsibilities and what you signed up for, in terms of being a force of light and working with Michael in terms of this regency, in terms of reclaiming the cosmic intelligence for the light. This was all planned, all designed, and there are those people. And I'm sure that you guys are some of them, or you wouldn't even be attracted to coming to hear this, because most of you, especially without a background, think this guy's out of his mind. But you tolerate me. You still keep coming back. You must be crazy. Like attracts like, you know. But we want to get a perspective here because this stuff I'm talking about is real and it's in our face and time is critical. That's why I'm talking about these what's going on right now in terms of the world. We're at a critical phase of human evolution, and I think most people are beginning to sense something's going on here. This is not normal. And it isn't. So, okay. To this, we must add that one of the things that happens as a result of the growth of materialism in human consciousness, as a result of the growth of this Ahrimanic influence in terms of human consciousness and culture, when people died during this last 1,000 years, 1,200 years or so, when they died and they went into the spiritual worlds, they took their darkness with them, of course. When you die and you go into the spiritual world, you take the sum total of that which you've done, good, bad, whatever. And we're going to find that the effect of the intense materialism, because materialism, this is intense materialism. You want to understand Ahriman's intention. He's trying to take over the earth, and he's trying to take over humanity and create his own kingdom and cut us off from the divine plan. He wants to trap souls and make them earthbound. And he wants to create a world that he rules, and it's all based in matter and materialism. And that's just a quick picture. We'll get into this more in future classes, but it's important to understand. So the influence of this Ahrimanic thinking and culture and utilization of the cosmic intelligence, as a person lives it, it permeates them. And I mean even their soul and the subtle bodies and their being. So when they drop the physical body and they go into the spiritual worlds, they take that sum total, whether it's light and darkness, and for all of us it's some mixture of the above, into the spiritual worlds. Well, there was such an onslaught of souls dying over the past 1,000 to 1,200 years that were so materialistically minded that when they cleansed and purified themselves, it dumped all of this darkness in the spiritual world. Basically, the light of the spiritual world became darker and darker and darker. And I'm not just, we can talk about the etheric dimension, we can talk about the astral dimension, we can talk about the lower mental, but we are going to find that these inner spiritual worlds got darker and darker and made it much more difficult, for example, for an individual to be able to work effectively with their angel. That this darkness created such a vibration and density that mankind was losing touch with its messenger and with its links to home in the spiritual worlds. It was becoming a cosmic crisis. And one of the things to understand, and these are things we'll go into more in future classes, and I've talked about them in past classes too, but at the time of the crucifixion and the resurrection of the Christ being entered into the earth, the Christ never left. The Christ being is in the etheric dimension of the earth, not in the physical. It's in the aura of the earth. And it, as it said, I will be with you till the end of time. And that is that until this whole process of evolution is completed, from the standpoint of transforming earth into a sun and ascending to the next dimensional reality from a physical to a non-physical reality, and humanity creating heaven on earth, and we can get all this, that this is not fairy tales, this is real stuff. It has to do with us actually creating that divine within the physical dimension. And that we'll get into more deeply at another time. But this then was very critical because also the Christ being, people couldn't connect with the Christ. The Christ was in the inner realms. It was in the etheric dimension. The darkness was such, very esoteric stuff. In the etheric, the Christ went through another death and resurrection, another crucifixion and resurrection as a result of taking onto itself all this darkness, all this evil. It went through a second. It went through the physical crucifixion and resurrection. Now we're talking about an etheric crucifixion and resurrection. But so that is very important, but it still was incredibly dark. And so Michael saw that in order for him to be able to effectively fulfill his regency at this time, that as a prelude and a prerequisite of that, he had to go into those spiritual worlds surrounding the earth and beyond. Because actually the astral goes from the physical earth to the orbit of the moon. So it's that whole realm. That he had to go in and clear out this spiritual realm so that the light could shine again, so people could connect with their angels, so that people could connect with the Christ, because we are literally in the time of the second coming of the Christ. It started in 1932, but it's not a physical event. All these fundamentalists, all this stuff that you hear, is bogus. Christ will never take another physical body. That was done. It will never happen again. The Christ being is drawing us through the dimensional realities back home. And it is actually moving in this regard, drawing us in this way like the attraction of the light. And that which is the second coming of the Christ is an etheric event, and it's happening now. But people weren't able to connect with it because of the darkness on the inner planes. They couldn't connect with what was going on. So Michael, basically, what happened, there was a war in heaven, or in the spiritual worlds, and specifically the astral dimension. And it had to do with the Ahrimanic beings, because these beings are not just stuck here on earth. They're not limited to that. They tried to storm heaven. They tried to basically take over, and this is a topic for another time, but they wanted to take control of the whole reproductive part of heredity and genetics. And it's one of the things you want to understand about some of the stuff that's going on in terms of science. They wanted to try to limit humanity's evolution by controlling the genetic and hereditary influences of the physical body. And you want to understand that when we talk about genetics and these kind of things, it just relates to the physical vehicle. It does not relate to the soul or the spirit that indwells it, but to the degree that we, as a soul or a spirit, cannot make this physical vehicle function in terms of the light, then we're trapped. We're stuck. We can't evolve. We need a physical instrument that corresponds with the abilities and consciousness that indwell it, or we've got a terrible situation. Okay. Anyway, there was a battle between Michael and Ahriman. Michael's hosts and Ahriman's hosts in the astral dimension. The war began in 1840 and continued to 1879. And it wasn't completed until 1879. And Ahriman and his hosts lost. And we're going to find that they were all thrown down to the earth. So guess what, folks? These beings that weren't in the earth before, they were in the spiritual worlds, are now here in the earth. So they were cleared out of the spiritual worlds in order to facilitate our ability to connect with the Christ event, the second coming of the Christ, and also to connect with our angels and really be able to develop our consciousness in a spiritual way and open up to spiritual experiences in the spiritual world, etc., etc. But now we got these guys right here. And they're not in physical form. They are dark angels. They are dark beings. And they have accelerated and intensified the materialism since 1879. And for those of you who know history, when we start looking at 1879 forward, we see the coalescing of the international banking system, the rise of the tycoons, and this heavy concentration of power through money. And the leader of these beings' name that got thrown down to the earth, this being's name is Mammon. Mammon embodies as a spiritual being that dark principle of greed. And if we look and understand, we will see the acceleration, an intensification of greed since this time of 1879. It's not that it didn't exist before, of course it did. But when we talk about these things, we're talking about a very intense acceleration or intensification of these influences within human consciousness and human culture and human civilization. And yes, it was necessary to clear out the spiritual world, and actually Michael had to do that in order to even have a chance at reclaiming the cosmic intelligence in terms of human evolution, because we had to have the ability to connect with the Christ, we had to have the ability to connect with our angels, we had to have the ability to connect with the archangels. But also know that Michael and his hosts are right here now also. And what I mean by right here now, I mean the etheric. The physical is this dimension we're very aware of. But that dimensional reality that is next inner from the physical is the etheric. And it's called the vital or the life. And we're not going to get into it right now, but it's a whole dimensional reality. It's very solar in nature. When we talk about prana and chi and things like that, these are forces of the etheric dimension. When we talk about acupuncture and working with meridians and all of this kind of stuff, we are talking about that solar energy. It's not of this earth, it's from the sun. And we get it from our environment. And if we don't get it, it affects us. And so here we have a darkening here, an intensification, but now we could say, in our Western terminology, the cavalry is here. In terms of Michael and his host, because he is a warrior being. He is a warrior being. And that's one of the things to understand in terms of trying to have a personal relationship with Michael. That isn't, he has an aversion, and it isn't just an aversion. For principle, he cannot become connected with physical reality or the earthly reality because of his nature. And also because of what he's dealing with, you're going to find Michael's demeanor is rather stern. He's not warm and fuzzy. He's here to do business. And he's recruiting and working with those people who are on his side. And some of you, or maybe all of you, were part of his school in the sun. And you signed up. And he is here now under very challenging circumstances. So when we look at this battle in heaven, this was the completion of that in 1879 was when he then started his regency in terms of this 300-year period of his rulership. And it's also when he got elevated to the status of an archai as a result of this. Because this was a big deal. I mean, there's an example right there, but all the things you've heard about Michael and the dragon. Ahriman is the dragon. Michael is Michael. He's the warrior. And there's all kinds of levels we can talk about that on. We can talk about that in terms of the higher spiritual self and the lower material self. We can talk about it from the standpoint cosmically of exactly what's represented. But you're going to find the myths or the traditions, the spiritual traditions of every culture and civilization in humanity has the equivalent of Michael and the dragon. And what we talk about in terms of this war in heaven from 1840 to 1879 is something that has been repeated many times in the past. Different issues, different situations, but where the darkness and the light have battled, and I mean as real beings and as forces in the spiritual worlds. And Michael has always been the victor, to where he has been able to hold off the darkness from basically invading the realms of light or the spiritual, higher spiritual worlds. And they try to storm heaven periodically. And what they wanted to do this last time was take over this very esoteric, powerful stuff related to human heredity and really trap human beings in physical bodies and limit our ability to evolve into higher consciousness. Now, mammon, so when you look around, this thing of greed, we look at Wall Street and we look at the bailouts and we look at the complete bust of the financial system. And by the way, for those of you who don't know me, I spent 25 years in investment banking international. So I know a lot about money, and I work from the top, and I know how dark it is, and I know what goes on, and I know how corrupt it is. I know this stuff, and it is, that's why I walked away. I felt literally like I was losing my soul, even though I was incredibly successful from a financial standpoint. But these are the forces that are running the world. And these are directly related to Ahriman and this being Mammon. Now, additionally, one of the other primary ways that's extremely relevant to us at the present time of the manifestations of these Ahrimanic beings of darkness in our physical world is that they are what's behind bacteria and viruses. And again, if you do studies, you're going to see this explosion of bacteria and viruses and epidemics. Not that there weren't epidemics before, but you're going to see these beings, because they are beings, evolving. One of the scary things was in the Wall Street Journal about a week or two ago, they've now identified a virus that they have no antibiotics for. It's being noted. It's been in India and England, etc. There is no known way to fight this virus. There's no antibiotics. There's no way, and it has started to spread. And part of what we're talking about here is related to these Ahrimanic beings, and again relating to attacking the physical so that it can't support higher consciousness. And if we literally get into viruses and bacteria, it literally goes into the processes of decomposition of the physical body that relate to the principles of death that Ahriman rules. We could go into all of the legitimate areas that Ahriman rules, but basically these beings of darkness don't want to stay within the boundaries that are the legitimate realm. And so when we look, and those are just a couple of manifestations, we'll go into this more in future classes to understand exactly what we're dealing with and what's going on and how to deal with it. So when we look then at this present time, since 1879, Michael is now the regent. He is now in the process of trying to reclaim the cosmic intelligence and reclaim that in terms of each one of us individually. But things are trickier now. Back during his last regency, evolution automatically happened to us through the blood, unconsciously. But things have changed, and you want to be very, very clear about this. Evolution does not happen to you anymore. You must have it happen to you yourself. You must evolve yourself. You must evolve your own consciousness. And that's the only way Michael can work with you. And that's the only way you can work with Michael. If you have not made a commitment or you haven't consciously really moved your life in terms of values and priorities and directions and actions, in terms of growing yourself and your consciousness and becoming a better person, then you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. And we want to be very clear. This is the moment of truth. This is the time of choice. This particular lifetime for you, at this point evolutionarily, the masters would say, yes, we still have lots of opportunities. If we really screw up and make a lot of bad decisions in this lifetime, we still got plenty of opportunities, many lifetimes in the future to correct it. But this particular lifetime is probably the most significant lifetime you've ever lived, because the potential influence it will have on your future incarnations is huge. Meaning there's what is beginning to happen, just as you see in the world, there's beginning to be a separation and a polarization. This is happening spiritually in human evolution also. And it becomes very critical and important. You're very conscious of the choices that you make. Because every time you make a choice, you're voting for the light or the darkness, the right or the wrong. And this is karma. What goes around comes around. What you put out there comes back to you. And so when we start looking at this from a very practical standpoint, it's where we've got to clean up our act and get clear about what we're doing and why we're here and what our values are. And making a commitment and putting it into action. And it isn't just about you. Of course it's about you. But it's about the whole world, and it's about the whole cosmos. Because things are on the line. And yeah, there's more time. I mean, there's more opportunity, and we'll have the opportunity to work in the spiritual worlds. But just to give you an idea, on average, and for a lot of you, because many of you were in Michael's school in the sun, and you spent many hundreds of years there, but the average time, and I just mean averages, because averages really don't tell us a lot, but they give us a certain understanding. The average time between lifetimes that we spend in the spiritual worlds preparing for our next incarnation is 500 years. Meaning, when we look at the life that we have lived, that we are living, if you understood the preparation and work that you have done in the spiritual worlds preparing for this lifetime, it would absolutely boggle your mind. And that's stuff that we will get into in future classes. But again, you have to work, and you do work with all of the different spiritual hierarchies in developing your bodies and your physiology and your karma and your life plan and the people you're going to incarnate with and the country you're going to incarnate with and the language that's going to be most expressive of your soul quality, which is expressed in the language, and we can go on and on. Just to give you an idea, if you think births and who your children are accidents, or who your parents are, accidents, minimally, in the spiritual world, you are working with the family lineage that you are going to be born into 3 generations prior to your birth. Because it relates to this whole thing of having the design of a physical body that will be the vehicle for your soul and spirit that is appropriate and fitting, and really gives you the tools you need to express the consciousness that you embody. So when we get into this stuff, it's very far out, but it's very real. And then when we look, I mean, one of Maharishi, I spent many years with Maharishi. I spent 15 years with Maharishi Mahesh Yogi as a teacher and being in charge of the TM movement. And one of the things his master said to him, Swami Brahmananda Saraswati, who was an enlightened master of such great renown. I mean, to give you an idea, this individual in the jungles of India was sitting out there in the jungles of India by himself in meditation. And for 25 miles around, all the animals, whether they were leopards or deer or whatever, were in total harmony. Everything in nature, in his whole environment, was in total harmony. There was no killing, there was no death. But one of the things that Maharishi's master, Swami Brahmananda Saraswati, told him, or he actually, I even saw it, it was actually this very ancient film, where he basically said, most people value their lives as if it was a can of spinach. Which is just such a statement, because when you look at the way people live their lives, what they value, what they do, what they think their life is about, what is important to them, they're lost. I mean, there's many ways we could describe it. They don't have a clue about what's really going on and why they're here and all the work they put in and what the possibilities and opportunities that they have presented to them every day that they don't see and they don't take advantage of. And we don't want to be that. Because I guarantee you, every single day, the universe and life are presenting you opportunities, but you have to awaken to them. And that's one of the things that Michael is the awakener. And part of the thing about materialism, you want to know and understand that one of the principles they use is putting you to sleep. It was the basic principle of how the emperors of Rome ruled the Roman Empire is bread and circuses. Fill their stomachs and entertain them. And they won't care what we do with their world. Look at our world. Bread and circuses. Total distraction in terms of what is really going on. You've got to wake up. You've got to see what is going on. You've got to step up. You've got to do what you came here to do. And I know that in your degrees you all have, or you wouldn't be sitting here. But you are each a center of influence. And it is the purpose of these classes is to put it on the line. As I was telling somebody before, because I've been doing classes for, well, I've been on this path and doing this for 45 years. I've never not stopped teaching. I was telling somebody before I started these classes that I'm starting right now, I'm not holding back anymore. I've been holding back for years. Because the time wasn't right. The time is now. It's all coming out. And if you want to hear it, I'll be giving it. And this is the real deal. I guarantee you. This is not baloney. It's not fantasy. It's not illusion. We'll get into all of those distractions on the spiritual path and those dead ends and those cul-de-sacs that so many people encounter in terms of trying to walk that path. Because just deciding you want to walk that path, boy, that's when your real challenges begin. You think regular life is challenging? Start walking that path. You're going to find things were real easy before that. Because the darkness doesn't want you to grow, and it's going to do everything in terms of distracting you and blocking you and challenging you. And you've got to understand how it works and what it does and how to deal with it. And we'll definitely be doing that. And so this is the time of the light. The light is rising. We want to be very, 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 very clear, because when we look at the news at night and we look at the headlines of the newspapers, We could say the whole world is going to hell in a handbasket. And in a certain respect it is. But it's because the light is rising and consciousness is rising, and the darkness does not want that consciousness to rise, that it is creating all these distractions and problems and blockages and challenges. You want to understand that there's a purpose and intention behind all this crisis, and it is to distract you from the real event which is going on in here. This is about connecting with your higher spiritual self. The Christ being is your higher spiritual self. It embodies the cosmic consciousness. It is that which is your ultimate reality. It is the second coming of the Christ. It's an inner event. It's not an outer event. These people that are talking about a physical second coming are deluded. And actually that is the darkness. When we start getting into religion and stuff like this, we could talk about Wall Street and finance and banks. We can also talk about it in terms of religion and every other thing from government, medicine. We could go on and on. We need to understand and be able to see things as they truly are, to be able to discern and discriminate and be seeing what is of the light and what is of the darkness. Because if you don't, you're going to be sucked in. And one of the things you want to understand about the darkness, one of the names of this being, Ahriman, is the liar. All lying and cheating and stealing is based upon the energy and consciousness of this being. And if you don't know the truth, you're going to be off. You're not going to find your way. And one of the things you want to understand, and it is a principle, and I'll just use this as an example, but in the CIA, and I mean this is a principle they use, and it's a principle that the being of darkness uses, and all the beings of darkness use, of disinformation, is that we'll give you 85% truth, 15% falsehood. You're going to swallow the whole thing, and the 15% falsehood is going to be such it throws you off enough, you're going to miss the target. And that's what's going on all around us. And it takes somebody very alert, very awake, discerning and discriminating and understanding what's going on to be able to find our way through this mess, this darkness. This culture is based in darkness. This has been 1,200 years of Ahrimanic influence on human intelligence and culture and civilization. We have to see it for what it is. So when we look at this is that time, but we want to understand, and this is the important thing, we are in the time of the rising of the light. The dawning of a new day is happening. We cannot be distracted and confused and get caught up in the drama to the degree that we take our attention off what is truly important and truly happening, which is the expansion of consciousness and the unfolding of the light of the Spirit. This is a totally unique time. Michael's regency, second coming of the Christ. Michael is always the emissary of the Christ. And he's here once every 2,160 years. Or an age. And it's now. And I guarantee you it was no accident you were born now. You chose to be here and be part of this. Pretty exciting. And the greater the crisis, the greater the opportunity spiritually. So and I speak from personal experience, but also from that which you know and also is reflected to the degree that you've been paying attention and you've stepped on the path. You're growing awareness of people's expanding awareness and growing of consciousness. It's happening all around. And a lot of people don't even understand what it is they're experiencing. But they are having, their quality of life is changing. Their quality of consciousness is changing. It's expanding. It's becoming enlightened. The people are changing. They're beginning to seek things out. And they're wanting to know. They're wanting to understand. They're wanting to improve themselves. They're wanting to really see through this and understand what's going on. Because you have to make an effort. It is work to really find your way in this world, in this time. But you've got great allies. You've got Michael. You've got your angel. You've got the Michaelic hosts, etc. Yeah. So whatever in that regard. But this is that time. So When we then talk about the spirit of the age, we are talking about, hopefully now we have some understanding. Understand that tonight is an overview. We've covered a lot of length, breadth, and depth. And that's to give us a perspective and a structure from which to go more deeply into this in future classes. Because if we don't really have kind of this broader, deeper understanding of how things work and what's going on, then the other information isn't quite as effective, if you will. And one of the things that I want to remind you that is so beautiful, and it becomes very important for you to understand. We can go through the spiritual hierarchies, etc., as we just kind of just briefly touched on. But you want to be clear that we as human beings embody what the cosmos knows, what is known throughout the spiritual worlds and the spiritual cosmos of the universe, that we are the 10th spiritual hierarchy. We are in the process of taking our place within the cosmos, and it requires us following along the path that's been designed for us by the beings of light, and overcoming the obstacles and challenges of the beings of darkness, which makes us that much stronger and that much more intelligent, and our consciousness that much stronger, so that we find that the end result of human evolution is such that humanity, it goes into deep mysteries that the alpha and the omega, or the last will become first. And in a certain respect, you could look at ourselves and say, well, we're at the lowest level of creation in the physical realm, and this dense material place, and none of these other beings have soiled their being by contacting or becoming involved with this very dark place. But we'll find, by taking it into ourselves and transmuting it and transforming it and turning it into light and understand it, another way of understanding it is, and this is quite real, is that every one of these beings of darkness, in the process of our own transmutation and transformation, we turn back into their true nature of beings of light. We allow the entire creation to reclaim its true nature, and it's through us. It's through humanity. Humanity is the agency of the divine, of transmuting and transforming darkness into light. And we can talk about it on all kinds of different levels. But to understand it for the cosmos, it is actually to transform the very principle and beingness of evil and darkness into goodness and light through our own process of evolution and transformation. By taking on a physical body, you take on darkness. When you eat every day and breathe every day and drink every day, you are taking into yourself these principles that must be alchemically transmuted. When we talk about the principle of death, what happens to your physical body? The principle of entropy of physics, create a system, begins to disintegrate and die and degenerate. You have to keep feeding it life force in order to keep it alive and going. We're going to find we all die. And it's the nature of the physical of death. It's one of the realities, and Ahriman rules the principle of death. And that's a big thing we'll get into later. But the thing to understand is that the reality, what was represented to us in terms of the resurrection, is exactly what each and every one of us will go through from the standpoint of transmuting this physical body back into a diamond body of light. That is what the resurrection body is. So that we are going to find, what is this? This is a carbon-based body. Learned that from Star Trek. What is, when we transmute carbon, what does it become? Diamond. Under the greatest heat and pressure. Can you relate? Over long periods of time, we become a diamond. And it is actually, diamond is the hardest element of the mineral kingdom. The mineral kingdom is the lowest kingdom. We're going to find the diamond is the perfection. And actually, to understand it in a deeper sense, the physical dimension of reality is a mirror back to the Supreme Being. It sees itself in physical matter. And when we actually refine physical matter to that of diamond, it's a perfect mirror. And we discover who we are, and it also discovers who it is, because it is in this eternal process of self-discovery through its creative expression. and we are the microcosm of the macrocosm, and what we realize is that we are one with this being and that consciousness. And then what happens is the lowest becomes the highest, the last becomes the first, and that's what the Christ was referring to in many different ways, is that which is at the lowest becomes at the right hand of God, because we are the agency to be the conscious co-creators and the completion of the divine plan. It cannot be completed without humanity achieving its goal, because we are to create heaven on earth. We are to create the divine paradigms and manifest them in physical matter through this whole process of transmuting darkness into light. We are to create that divine design of the highest level and manifest it at the lowest level and complete the whole process and intention of creation. Kabbalistically, if you look at the tree of life, Yesod, the 10th Malkut, the 10th Sephirot, which we are the 10th spiritual hierarchy, is the fruit of the tree. It is that which all the spiritual hierarchies and every level of creation feed into. It's just like a tree. The end result of a plant is the flower and the fruit. And the earth is that which is the fruit of the entire creation. And humanity is the agency of the manifesting of this fruit. And this, as I think you can sense, gets into some wild stuff. So the point that I want to make is that we are the 10th spiritual hierarchy, which cosmically is the hierarchy of freedom and love. And we are going to find, so that we understand this, that as we complete and fulfill our destiny, everything on this earth, and every person, but every leaf and rock and flower and cloud, will radiate in the most intense manner love and freedom. And it's not that love and freedom do not exist within creation, but they will never exist to the degree of intensity of perfection as what we are destined to unfold, because it is being done in the most trying and challenging of all circumstances in all of creation. And so the end result is the ultimate. And we are known. So if you want to know your destiny, it's growing and increasing freedom and increasing love. And those go way beyond what your understanding of those words are at the present time, which we'll get into more deeply. And now, this, Mary, if you could pass these out, please. Mary's going to pass out the Foundation Stone Meditation. And this is something that that I'd like us to read together. It'll just take a couple of minutes and then we'll be done. That is very powerful, and it actually aligns you directly with Michael and the Christ. It is something that was given to us through Rudolf Steiner, an enlightened master and initiate from Austria, whose whole life was really about bringing this knowledge to humanity through the Christ and Lord Michael. And this actually was manifested in the physical, if you will, at what was known as the Christmas Conference in 1923 in Dornach, Switzerland. But this is a powerful tool for each and every one of you. What I would suggest, to the degree that you're motivated to do it, is read this in the morning when you get up and read it in the evening when you go to bed. You read it in the evening when you go to bed, it carries you into the spiritual worlds in a way that will be quite different than just going to sleep. Because when we go to sleep at night, we go into the spiritual worlds. We want to understand that. So how you go into the spiritual worlds when you go to sleep can make a tremendous difference in your growth and evolution. And, you know, we'd say, 8 hours of nothing. No, there's a lot of stuff going on. So we, if we're aware, we can create conditions where this growth continues at a significant pace, because we're actually in the spiritual world. We're not in the physical. So guess what? If we're actually doing spiritual things in the spiritual worlds, the results can be much more significant. And then we bring that back when we come in and wake up in the morning. And then when we read this in the morning, it sets us up for the day. It aligns us for our day's activity. So, glasses here. So, I'd like us to read this together. Okay? Foundation stone meditation. Soul of man, thou livest in the limbs which bear thee through the world of space, into the ocean being of the spirit. Practice spirit recollection in depths of soul, wherein the wielding world creator life, thine own eye, comes to being within the eye of God. Then in the all-world being of man, thou wilt truly live. For the Father Spirit of the heights holds sway, in depths of worlds begetting life. Seraphim, cherubim, thrones, spirits of strength, let there ring out from the heights what in the depths is echoed, speaking, Ex Deo Nascimur. From God mankind has being. The elemental spirits hear it, in east and west and north and south, may human beings hear it. Soul of man, thou livest in the beat of heart and lung, which leads thee through the rhythmic tides of time, into the feeling of thine own soul being. Practice spirit mindfulness in balance of the soul, where the surging deeds of the world's becoming do thine own eye unite unto the eye of the world. Then mid the weaving of the soul of man, thou wilt truly feel, for the Christ will in the encircling around hold sway, in the rhythms of worlds blessing the soul. Curiosities, dynamis, exousiae, spirits of light, let there be fired from the east what through the west is formed, speaking, in Christo morimur, in Christ death becomes life. The elemental spirits hear it, in east and west and north and south, may human beings hear it. Soul of man, thou livest in the resting head, which from the ground of the eternal opens to thee the thoughts of worlds. Practice spirit vision in quietness of thought, where the eternal aims of God's world being's light on thine own eye bestow for thy free willing. Then from the ground of the spirit of man thou wilt truly think, for the Spirit's universal thoughts hold sway in the being of all worlds beseeching light. Archai, archangeloi, angeloi, spirits of soul, let there be prayed in the depths what from the heights is answered, speaking, per spiritum sanctum reviviscimus. In the Spirit's universal thoughts the soul awakens. The elemental spirits hear it, in east and west and north and south, may human beings hear it. At the turning point of time, the spirit light of the world entered the stream of earthly being. Darkness of night had held its sway. Day radiant light poured into the souls of men. Light that gives warmth to simple shepherds' hearts. Light that enlightens the wise heads of kings. O light divine, O Son of Christ, warm thou our hearts, enlighten thou our heads, that good may become what from our hearts we would found, and from our heads direct with single purpose. So this is something we'll get into more in future classes of understanding this. At this point it may seem something of an enigma. By the way, I would point you to the second stanza on the first page, where halfway down it says X and it says Do Nascimur. It should be Deo, D-E-O. So if you can add, Deo means God. So if you can put it, it's on the first page, put down the second stanza. You want to add an E there. It should be D-E-O, Deo. And so this will be something that we'll be getting more into in the future, but whether you understand it or not, it still works. It's nice. It's like a powerful mantra. Yeah. Yeah. So I want to thank you all very much for coming, and good night.
Thank you.